bunch of them. There are things that people assume about old people, set in their ways, or can't teach an old dog new tricks type of
Chicken hawks.
chicken hawks in our community, probably outside of our community as well. Old people are creepy.
Well, that one's true.
Hello and welcome to the Kink Tank's pilot episode, where we'll discuss age, aging, and ageism in our kink lives and communities. I'm your host, Mr. Michael, and this time we'll get into the details of how we view age as it correlates to experience and wisdom, common perceptions of people in kink of different age groups, some considerations while aging and practicing your kink, and more. These live events take place every other Thursday at 9 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. So have a look at our website, thekinktank.com, to find out how you too can participate directly or spectate anonymously when we're on air and get involved in the broadcast in other ways. So let's get started with age, aging, and ageism. We're here to talk about age, aging, and ageism, and probably some of us can comment on aging, but I don't know, there's a lot of topics. I mean, I hosted the Early Bloomers group for a few years there after I created it. It was there for a particular reason, because there were age issues in the community. I'm glad to say that I think that those are a little bit lessened these days. But I think what I wanted to most talk about was what age has to do in our community, anyways, or in a BDSM community. Just how does age affect things in general?
My first crack at that is that I think that there is a skewed perception about age, because it's really interesting for me in the kink community or in the fetish community. I've always found that experience speaks more to people than age, but people automatically associate age with experience. And that's really not always the case. Having been, at least in the Louisville community for literally a decade this year, there are people I know who are in their 20s who, when they say on their profile, I've been in the community for 7 years or 8 years, that's true, and they're only, 26 years old or 25 years old, and have years more experience than 30 or 35-year-olds who have been here for a year or two. But people will gravitate to the older people, presuming that they know more. Now, I'm not going to account for life experience, because I think that's a real thing, that counts towards your common sense and your just general judgment and overall wisdom. But at least in terms of, recommendations about who's safe to play with, when the parties are, who such and such is, what's going on, there are some people who are younger who I think get really shortchanged in terms of being resources for people who are new, regardless of age. And I think it's even worse when you have people who are older coming in new. They don't want to take advice from younger people because they assume they know nothing, despite the fact that they might have literally years of experience. Now, I know a lot of people lie about their experience, but like I said, being around, I've seen a lot of people who are younger but have a legitimate amount of experience, who have literally showed up at the first party they could when they turned 18 and have been coming ever since.
Right. Yeah, that was one of the things. I mean, when I started the Early Bloomers group, the TNG group for people 18 to 35, I was, I think, 33 at the time. So I was on the old end of that spectrum. And I had people coming out of the woodwork saying, well, these young people need mentorship. These young people need some kind of teaching, guidance, learning, because the assumption there was people 18 to 35 are obviously new at this, obviously don't have the experience and so forth. And I thought, I'm 33, and by that time I had 6 years under my belt, and I was one of the few people in our community that was still around after 6 years. I mean, there was like maybe a dozen people that had been participating, not necessarily doing BDSM as long as I had. Some of them have been doing BDSM for many years before they found community or moved here and found us. But that was a big danger, something that I was really trying hard to undo, the perception that age has something to do with experience or suitability as teachers, or because 18 to 35, I mean, if the group had been like for people 18 to 20, specifically like under 21s, okay, yeah, probably still there would be probably a few people there that have been doing this for a few years. And let's not discount the fact that not everybody's years are equal.
Yeah.
There are those new people that you see that come in and they drink everything in they can, and they look for all the information. They're playing all the time. They're going to events everywhere. That first year that they're involved can sometimes, as far as knowledge and experience, be worth 5 years of the sort of casual community attendee.
Well, they have a lot of that new relationship energy, which I think tends to affect younger people more. So they tend to absorb everything. Like they want to do everything at once. Mm-hmm. Whereas when you're older, you tend to be a little bit more routine-based, where you kind of find the event that you like and you go to that until you know more people. You're a little bit more structured, and new people just don't seem to care. I mean, they seem to like that kind of chaos.
You're talking about new people or young people?
Young people in this case specifically. Young people who are new tend to really get drawn in, and they all of a sudden, if they've got the means, they're traveling, at least from our location, to Lexington, to Cincinnati, to Indianapolis, just to see different communities, because they've got enough energy that what's going on in Louisville, as large as it is and as diverse as it is, they've got more energy than there are events.
Well,
I've met some young,
That feels right to me, but I'm wondering if we're, applying stereotypes.
I'm just talking for me personally about some anecdotal evidence. I mean, it doesn't apply to everybody, obviously. I've met some young people who are very timid and very happy to just come to things where they know people. But, I'm thinking in my particular case about some of the people I'm involved with, who have literally spent, they got here in their early 20s and had already spent, a year in Lexington. Mm-hmm. They show up here and you assume that they're brand new because they're brand new here and they're young. Mm-hmm. But have been attending parties and events, and with friends there had gone to some different things kind of in some of the surrounding areas.
But I think that some people apply older people stereotypes to that same thing. Someone from a different perspective would be listening to this conversation and say, well, I would think that was the opposite. The older people, generally have more secure sort of regular 9-to-5 jobs. They're not working third shifts and weird hours and stuff. They have disposable income that younger people maybe don't. And I dismiss those as stereotypes as well. I mean, that sounds right. It feels right. But is it actually right? Is that a good demographic assumption to make?
The thing is, really, for the point I'm trying to make, it doesn't matter. And why I say that, though, is, again, we could go through the statistics or the anecdotes. The point is that there is a general sense that people who are young are inexperienced. And what I am saying is I think it's an unfair assumption to make. So whether I say I think young people all travel and all do this stuff is really irrelevant to the fact that even if there's 2 or 3 of them out of 100 that do it, it doesn't make them less experienced simply because of their age. Because this community has drawn a lot. I mean, I've seen a lot of people who have shown up in their mid to late 30s because it's something that's always interested them, but because of the relationship they were in, they could never explore it, and are as green as the grass, when they come into their first event and know nothing. But those 30-something-year-olds, in my experience, are never going to take advice from a 20-year-old. Certainly people who come in identifying as dominants are not going to take advice from a 20-year-old. And I think that's unfortunate. I mean, and I want to section it off because we're going to talk about people who are on the older end of the spectrum. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, don't get me wrong. I meet a lot of people who are young and clearly, from my perspective, and this is just my perspective, immature. They still have a lot to learn. They're brash, they're loud, and that's okay because it's a sign of youth as far as I'm concerned. But there are a few who are really, really a lot more grounded than their age or their apparent experience would dictate.
Right. More so than people would assume about them because of their age.
Sure, sure. The flip side is also true. There's a lot of people who assume that because you're old, you know everything, and it might be your first munch.
You're wise, or you have your shit together, you know.
Well, I'm running into this now where somebody's saying, "Oh, I'm talking to so and so about advice and who I should play with and this and that," and I'm thinking, like, I've seen them since they've been here. They've been here like 4 months. Like, I don't know where this experience that you think they have to guide you on sort of the inner workings of the local community come from. You know, well, I can think of a...
Yeah, and we're applying it to our community situations, you know, people looking for information, people looking for mentorship or some kind of teaching. But let's talk a little bit about, like, non-community ageism, or some of the things that we're talking about right now, saying, like, okay, for instance, you enlist in the military and you find that your immediate superior is 2 years younger than you. Is that, you know, your boss at work is 12 years younger than you, and some people have an issue with that. You know.
Yeah, but the difference there, though, is that unlike the kink community, those places generally have a regimented training program. Mm-hmm. If you've got an officer or a senior person in the military who's senior to you, the fact that they have that rank demonstrates that they've done the training, the education, and the time to earn that rank. So there's already an implied value to the rank. We've talked about this before. There's no ranking system. There's no curriculum that we have to study. There's no, you know, bars that you get that tell you how many years you've been here locally. And like you said, not all years are the same. I mean, I know people who come and go, you know, will take a couple of years off and come back. It's sad that I know that, you know, that I recognize people that haven't come for like 3 years.
Right.
Does that count as 3 years? Or does the person who's 25 and have those same 3 years where they attended everything have more practical experience in the community?
No, I agree. I'm just saying that we do this. This isn't exclusive to our community, you know, when we're talking about certain topics.
Yeah.
You know, it is, we're applying it to our community. But can we talk about it in a more broad scope? You know, the assumption that, you know, the assumptions that old people make about young people, and the assumptions that young people make about old people. Because I'd like to hear some of those. You know, there's a few that we've already thrown out that, you know, there's some kind of wisdom gap between the two. You know, young people are generally seen as more daring. You know, they talk about, like, young drivers, for instance, you know, willing to take risks, willing to, you know,
bad early relationships.
Yeah, dysfunctional interpersonal relationships. Those assumptions, more energy. I don't know. I mean, there's a bunch of them. There are things that people assume about old people. You know, set in their ways, or you know, can't teach an old dog new tricks type of
chicken hawks.
Chicken hawks in our community, probably outside of our community as well. Old people are creepy.
Well, that one's true.
And I think, well, one of the more interesting ones that I've come across is the assumption that old people, because I'm now becoming one of those old people, that that the assumption that I have something against young people, that I'm judgy about them, so I get sort of they assume that I don't relate well to young people, or that I look down on them, or that I dismiss their opinions and so forth. That's an assumption that young people make about old people that isn't necessarily true. And I wanted to add, I see that we had somebody join our little chat here. Her microphone is muted at the time, but I'm really glad to see that it's more than just 3 dominant dudes in the conversation.
And someone who's younger and has some opinions on age, if I am correct.
Does she have some opinions on age?
I have a few. Sorry that I was late.
No, that's fine. I'm
That's
glad
because
you
I'm
joined
old and
us.
I know everything.
And it's been posted on my page a few times, and et cetera, et cetera. I talked about it.
Okay.
I'm just kind of getting a feel for the conversation right now to see where I can pop in.
Well,
Otherwise, I'll just be rude.
let's run with what I was just talking about. What are the things that people assume about you because of your age?
I mean, you already talked on a lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm younger, therefore clearly I don't know as much. But at the same point in time, when I first popped in, I was already giving advice to people who were older,
Mm-hmm.
and they were happily accepting it and taking it. On the flip side, there are people that automatically discredited me and just said, nope, goodbye, because clearly I didn't meet their standards and did not quite match that magic number that needed to be reached for their opinions to matter.
What about events that you've been excluded from?
There's a lot of those. There are quite a few of those. It's no surprise that I'm younger. It's kind of just truth of the matter. There are
You're
events
used
that
to it, so it's not a big deal.
What?
You're used to it, so it's not a big deal. Is that what you're saying?
Yes and no. I am used to it, so it hurts less, I guess would be a better way of saying that than just it's not a big deal. But there's a lot that I can't go to, just from the pure standpoint of exclusion. And then on the flip side, there are also things that I can attend that others can't because they're too old and they don't fit that barrier. Though as someone who usually socializes with people who are older than myself, it becomes
You raise one interesting point, though, that sometimes the community gets blamed for things that we have no control over. And one of those things is that we host a lot of events at bars, mostly because bars are the groups that will hold, will basically let us do what we do.
Oh yeah.
And so, but the thing is, it's interesting, and please, I'm not trying to argue with your point. I'm just simply saying I've heard people complain that the munch won't let us come to this or the party won't let us, but we're limited by the...
No, that's entirely not my argument. I understand that on one hand, there's also the argument that, well, hey, maybe you should try to host something that's not. I'm having that issue, Michael knows right now, not here locally, but in other places, that there's only 2 events that I can go to for an area that has an event almost every single day of the week, all month long. But there are only 2 that I can go to because they don't host them in venues that are that I can go into. Even though some I could, but not after the time that we would start things. I understand that. Just it becomes an issue of scheduling and location scouting and problems that have always existed.
Well, and I think that, Shane, at the same time, you're saying, take the drinking laws, for instance, and the problems, or the venues that people have events at. You look at the Slosh over at the Cure Lounge, and that is a 21 and older place. They don't have anybody, checking IDs at the door or anything, and they do serve food. We could have had a Slosh at a place like, TGI Fridays or the BBC, for instance, where it's a full bar. There's plenty of alcohol available, but people of all ages are welcome because it's more of a restaurant. So why couldn't we have a Slosh at some place like that instead? We chose to have it at the Cure Lounge, and mainly that's just because the place is really cool and it looks like
you're asking a trick question, though.
Okay, how so?
Because see, here you ask this question like it's coming from a place of ignorance. I don't know why we couldn't have done that. And you, above all people, should know how hard it is to secure a venue when you try to do things above board and say, here's what we are here to do. So all of those examples you gave of Applebee's, of whatever, would not come near us with a 10-foot pole. The venue that was chosen for the Slosh was like, you're bringing money and you want to do what? We don't care. You're bringing money? let us open our doors. We'll make you a special drink. We'll label it your night on our advertising. Let's bring people in.
Oh yeah, and that was a compelling reason why we chose that place, and then the manager is very easy to work with. But if it were important to us to include the 18 to 20 crowd, we would have said, yeah, that's cool. I know that I could find a restaurant somewhere around here or a restaurant bar. BBC would have been a good choice. That we could have done what we do, maybe even have a private room, maybe even have some of the perks. We didn't even investigate some of those, partially because this area was, this bar that we're at now was just that good a place for us. But because we're also looking at it like, well, how many people are we really excluding? Not very many, Emma being one of those people, unfortunately. But fringe elements, for instance, they have rules about, their first Friday party is 18 and over. The first Saturday party is 21 and over, and it's because of the BYOB policy.
Yep.
I'm not saying that they should be able to allow 18 to 20s in there and watch them like hawks and put big black X's on their wrists to make sure that they're not indulging in alcohol. I had to go through that process myself hosting play events. But the thing is that from a 18 to 20 perspective, you could say, well, yeah, it's 21 and over because you have booze there. But do you really need to have booze there? It's more important for you guys to be able to drink at a play party than it is to include people 18 to 20 that might want to come.
Let's not get too off on a tangent here. The point that I was trying to make is when we talk about perception, I think there are some things that are real in terms of legitimate exclusion. As Emma said, like groups that are geared towards people who are under 35, or groups like, even on FET, they have the over 40 curmudgeon group or whatever it happens to be, right? Mm-hmm. There are some things that are limitations. But what I was saying is that because a lot of our events are limited to the venues that we have, which are bars, right? I mean, we're lucky now because we've had some opportunities to do some different places, but, it wasn't that long ago when it was Starbase Q was the only place we could get space, or Fusion, or some of these bars, but people assumed that there was a choice that the Munch or the community was making to host them at these venues when, the American Eagle Lodge really wasn't available that night. And certainly not with the kind of regularity where, like you said, where we're trying to find a venue, do we want to complicate our lives by finding a venue that maybe excludes 5% of the possible available population versus finding a really good venue that works for 95% of the population? And then the rules of the bar supersede whatever rules we may want to include, and that gets lumped on us like we're trying to exclude young people, which we're not, which is why I know locally they've done a really good job. And I can't speak for every community, but I know locally a real effort's been made to run events like parties and whatever at venues that would allow us to include people who are under 21. You did it with the mix.
Yeah, I'm just saying that... go ahead, Emma.
I was going to say, here's a lot better locally. No, the community isn't quite as large as the other ones that I am frequently partaking in. But I can actually go to things, and we do make the effort to every Friday and Saturday, it's not just alcohol enough. I can actually attend and talk to people. However, on the other hand, other locations that I've been to, there is legitimately only one food-based meetup that I can attend because they just outright don't host them anywhere that anyone else can come into. I will also say that there is a greater percentage than 5 people. A lot of them won't come out to things though until they are of the older crowds because they feel that they can't come in.
Okay, you trailed off. We were losing your audio at the very end there. Couldn't hear you very well. Can you say that last part again, please?
What did it cut off at?
I don't.
There's more than 5%.
Okay, there is more than 5%. They're just not people that come out to things until they're older. They don't feel that they're quite welcome or that they should be attending things. A lot of them have also legitimate reasons due to, hey, maybe one day I want to have this career and I don't want to be in photos, and they think that that's what that is. It's not. But until they go out and figure that out for themselves, most of them won't listen, or they just don't want to be known. They don't want to be seen.
I should say, though, that I make those numbers up randomly off the top of my head.
Oh, no, I know.
I'm not a statistician, so it could be like 28%. I don't know. I just made up 5% to imply a minority of the population. How about that? Math is hard.
Well, you know, you did get my point, Shane, though, about the choice of venues. I mean, we could have had the Slosh at Beer Nose. They would have welcomed us. It's an 18, you know, definitely people under 18 are welcome there.
Well, yeah, but then is it just a munch? I mean, maybe we're talking semantics here, but I know that every other slosh that I've heard about is held at a bar. That's why it's a slosh. If it's held at a restaurant, it's a munch.
See, I don't know, and we're splitting hairs here, I guess, but a slosh and a munch, to me, are differentiated by the purpose of it. If the purpose is to stand at the bar at Beer Nose and have drinks together, then it's a slosh. Yeah, there are people that drink downstairs in the basement.
But are you allowed to be in the lounge if you're under 21?
Yes.
Okay, I didn't know.
We could, if it was that important for us to include the 18 to 20s in the community, I know that we could have found a place, whether it was Beer Nose or the BBC or, you know, a handful of other places. We could have. This place was particularly good for us, the place that we settled on. But the fringe elements thing, you know, enough people want to be able to have a drink at a play party that basically they're saying, you know, it's more important for us to have a drink at a party than it is to include the 18 to 20s in the Saturday parties. And I don't disagree with that, because there are parties that 18 to 20s can come to. They're not completely excluding them. They make exceptions for different classes and things like that. But from a young person's perspective, it might look like, you know, we're really not just all that important to them. We're not as important to the community. They'd rather have a little bit of booze there than have our participation.
Right. But here's the other interesting thing, which is the argument that gets made regardless of the circumstance that people have when they have an issue with an event or a function, which is, if there is something that you don't like, you can sit on the sidelines and bitch, or you can do your own.
Oh, I agree. But when you're talking about a play party, yeah, I mean, they could pick another night.
But fringe elements allows you to make any party you want, any day or night of the week. I mean, if you want to have an all-clown and puppy party, you can do that.
Yeah. Could it be on a Saturday night after a munch? No, because it's already taken by something else. It may not be the best night to do that type of thing. It may be that, you know, Saturdays being prime nights, you might get relegated to a Friday or a Thursday night.
Right, but there's 2 out of 4 Saturdays taken, which means literally half of the Saturdays are available.
Are they?
Now, I realize this doesn't apply to every community, but I mean, I think we make enough of an effort and also make the resources available for anybody who wants to do what they want to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and this is an ethos that has gone on since the mix, because you let people do whatever the hell they wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you want to have a Jello wrestling party? We'll host a Jello wrestling party. If you can get like 10 people to come out and wrestle in Jello, man, I'll set the pool up.
Yeah, I'll spend way too much time and money and hassle setting the pool up.
I was there for that.
All right, well, we can probably go on to some other things topic-wise. I take your point that, you know, if that is the case, if young people are feeling like they're being excluded, at least in this community, I think that we have, you know, options for them, either to throw their own parties at the dungeon space or to create their own type of event that they want to do, you know, around town at a restaurant or a bar or at, you know, Chuck E. Cheese or at the food court, wherever they want to hold that event.
But the one advantage that Louisville does have is now, except for the slosh, which has literally happened once, every non-party / you know, social event is open to everybody. All of the munches are available to everybody. Coffee's available to everybody. You know, your kinky camping is available to everybody.
Yeah.
Everything except at this point, 2 parties a month are open to everybody.
Yeah, 2 parties and a slosh. That's pretty much all.
And the slosh is brand new. I mean, it's not really fair to lump that in because, I mean,
but the other
last week it didn't exist.
But the other 15 events that we have every month are open to everybody.
Correct.
I agree. It's probably a good place for young people. There was a time where you needed to be 21 to come to the Munch. And that was something that I was glad that Constance got rid of. I don't know why it was there in the first place. We probably have to ask her. It might have had something to do with alcohol being present at beer nose or something like that. But that was how the first TNG group started in this town, because there were some underage people who wanted to come. And Constance was like, well, hey, sorry, but please, you should start your own thing. And, you know, I'll support it and mention it and try to get people there for you and whatever. Paradox was the same way, and both of them sort of dropped the 21 and over thing at the same time, or at a similar time, and made it 18 and over. So I don't think that falls under the. I mean, we're talking about age in our community and how it affects things and the events that you can attend and so forth. I wouldn't call that ageist, you know, having limits on who can attend what, you know, excluding some people, whether it's having an 18 to 35 group that doesn't allow older people, or having a slosh that doesn't allow the 18 to 20 crowd. I don't consider that ageist policy. I think ageism happens in much more subtle ways.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's more social than systematic.
Yes.
Again, at least here.
At least here, because I think that there might be other communities who don't feel that, who's it's more systemic, you know, kind of ingrained in the way that the group works. You know, that it might be that people of a certain age have these they're allowed to have this level of membership, where people of this age are allowed to have this level of membership. I don't know of anything like that, but it wouldn't surprise me if I heard that there were groups out there that would.
But it's odd, because I would be interested in other communities, because Louisville Munch community, the Louisville community, is so centralized in a sense. You know, there's not a lot of other things going on. But if you say go to Chicago, there are so many groups.
Yeah.
That it would be interesting to see, you know, do people feel relegated to a particular group rather than going to the one they want, because the one that they want to go to has a limitation on age, like say on, you know, over 21, but this other group that they may not be as interested in allows everybody, so that's where they go.
Yeah, and go ahead, Emma.
I was just saying, kind of like St. Louis, I'm in the lovely position of currently knowing and understanding the difference between 2 different sides and 2 completely different places, as someone who does get discredited a bit more than most of the people that I see currently in this chat. Nothing against you all, just what groups that I fit into. Louisville has been doing a much better job overall of, you know, I can go to things. I can go out, and I do see you all when I do go out most times, though I'm not here full time. There's also the point of just location, and it's just things that I've already touched on pretty much, but St. Louis is very much you are separated. If you are in this group, you're in this group. If you're in that group, you're in that group, unless you're going to a party, in which case a lot of the groups just don't attend. They're just not there. It was very strange when I saw some people in one night from a group, and it was an overall collective of those of us who regularly attend that party that were wondering, like, I wonder if they had something going on tonight, because there was a lot of people here from this group, but they're never here. This group is never represented.
Okay, is that an age thing you're talking about, or is that some kind of group rivalry, do you think, where
I have no
our group's better and we don't want to support what they're doing?
The age does tend to be older of the groups who don't come out, not so much younger. The younger crowd, we only have so much, so we tend to usually be at the same and similar events. There's only so many we can go to.
Are there, and this is something that I've kind of wondered about, because it was a strange phenomenon when I got involved, in when I got involved in South Bend. I went there the first time I went there with a partner. I was 26 or 27.
Mm-hmm.
We were easily the youngest people there at 26 or 27 years old. You know, in the year 2000, I think that might be the way BDSM communities were in general at the time. And I never felt really uncomfortable with that. But I can see why some people who feel like they're like at the very old end, the old end of the bell curve, or the very young end of the bell curve, that it's not that they've been made to feel unwelcome, or that they are being, you know, discriminated against in some way or hassled in some way, but that they come around and they look in the group and say, there's nobody else here like me. This feels weird. This doesn't feel like my group. This doesn't feel like I belong here. How much of that happens? Well, in St. Louis, for instance, you're talking about the young people. Are there groups that are decidedly older where that's just kind of the way that it is? You go there and say, well, this group's okay, and they're not telling me I shouldn't be here, but I'm the only one, and it's weird, so I'll go someplace where people are more like me.
That's the only food-based event that I can go to. There were two of us there that fit the younger crowd, status quo, one of which who was old enough to go to all events, barely, but we were still just kind of like sitting on the edge of a table, wondering what was going on when everyone else was around, and some people even warned me, like, so-and-so will probably talk to you because, you know, you look that old. And it was just things of that, and I was like, okay, that's nice to know. We don't really know those.
Okay. Well,
is there a congregation that happens, do you think? Where people are drawn to like people, even in communities where they are more cohesive? Like in Louisville, I do tend to notice generally, but not always, that quote-unquote younger people tend to hang out with younger people and older people tend to hang out with older people. Again, it's a generality. I see exceptions to it all the time, but that seems to be the trend, even in groups where everybody's welcome and everybody feels, you know, involved. Is it just a commonality?
As I can't go to as many things and observe it quite as well to give you as much of an overall view of that side of things, there are so few of us at the things except one party, in which we all mix together quite well, except for when that odd group is there that, you know, just doesn't come to that event. They stick to their own and they don't really mingle with anyone else, and that does usually tend to be the older crew that's coming in for, we don't know why they're there. It's a public event. We can all go. It's not really a big deal. We welcome them, but they don't really talk to us unless there's like something specific that they're like, oh, can we use this table that you all are using? Do you know when you'll be done? Things of that nature. So.
Well, I think, Shane, you're probably right. Those sort of birds of a feather, you know, people that you feel like you have something in common with, or people that you even assume are more like you than the other people in the room. And some people will group themselves off based on age. Sometimes sometimes I see there's kind of like the gay table over here, or there's the young table over here, or there's the submissive table over here, and you know, I guess that's natural. I don't necessarily see that as being ageist or, you know, problematic in the community, because first of all, it's nice that we have those groups. You know, if we had the old people that tended to be together, but there really were no younger people to congregate, then I'd feel like maybe the group were unwelcoming to young people, or the group were unwelcome to old people. But I'm interested in, you know, in actual, are there actual examples of ageism in our community that we can point to? I mean, aside from some individuals that you think are ageist.
Yeah.
Okay.
My experience has been that, again, and that's the reason why I wanted to lead off with that when we started talking about it, when it relates to sort of age versus experience. There are a lot of dominants with years of experience who are young who I don't think get taken seriously, and it makes it difficult for them to find people, even if they're open to having an older partner. Older partners generally aren't interested in them. And I also find it very interesting that older submissives, both male and female, seem to have trouble, even if they are more open to playing with people who are younger than them. Those younger people don't tend to be as interested in older people.
Okay.
So there's that. There seems to be that shift in power dynamic as it relates to age.
Okay. So, for instance, this is probably a good time to get into this when we're talking about dominants and submissives. Unfortunately, young dominants kind of get the shaft on this one, and it might even be that young male dominants get even worse shaft on this one. That there are people that say, you know, they're too young. I could never play with somebody like that. Don't really care about the content of their character. You know, don't really care about what they contribute to the community, how good at a particular skill they are. They just say, I can't do it. They're under 29, and I just don't do that. Or they're under 25, and no thank you. Is that what you're talking about, Shane?
Yeah, and I've seen, if you look, you'll actually see people with profiles that say, I won't date anybody who's X number of years younger or older than me. Like, they will literally cap that. Like, there's a hard limit that somehow there's like a relevance to a specific age. Like, if you're more than 10 years older than me, you're too old. Or if you're 10 years younger than me, you're too young. I mean, people will come out and say that.
Okay. What about, here's one that I've heard. If you are a 22-year-old and calling yourself a master, that's just bullshit ridiculous. Does anybody hear that before? You know, these people that say, yeah, they're the kind of person, you know, they call them, so they're master so-and-so on FetLife, etc., and I look at their profile and they're 20 years old. There's no way that this person could be a master at that age. Like, that's just ridiculous.
I think the entire concept of someone calling themselves a master is a little pretentious.
Okay.
But it's a checkbox.
It doesn't take much to just put that on your name. It's true.
Yeah.
It's funny, though, because, well, I don't know. We probably have a similar thing about the word slave. When somebody new to the community or somebody very young comes in and says, oh, I'm a slave, people go, yeah, well, they obviously really don't know what that, they don't really know what that means. Is that ageism?
I think so, but I think it's still related to experience. This presumption that people who are young don't have enough experience to use those labels in the way that we interpret them, but we associate that experience with their age, which isn't always true.
Well, I think it's kind of a confusing sort of mixed message. I mean, this isn't really topic relevant per se, but, you know, on the one hand, we distinguish between sort of play relationships between tops and bottoms, and we talk about DS relationships between dominants and submissives, and MS relationships between master and slaves, as if, you know, master is something, you know, that doesn't describe your level of prowess or your length involved, you know, how much knowledge that you have, but just its own little label about the kind of power dynamics that you like, or the kinds of power dynamics that you have in our relationship. On the one hand, we do say that a lot. We sort of treat master as a its own thing, not the end game in some, well, I used to be a top and now I'm a dominant and someday I hope to be a master. We treat it as its own thing. It's its own flavor of kink. It's its own way of doing power dynamics. And on the other hand, if somebody who is brand new to this and that's what they're into and that's the kind of relationship, the kind of power dynamics they have with their partner, we don't buy it. We say, master, after a year, you're crazy. I think it's a mixed message that we send. Do we agree?
Yeah, and I don't discount that. I think, like I said, I think the problem, the perspective that I have on experience versus age is that experience in the community automatically associates baggage with labels and titles. And so being in the community for a certain amount of time creates an implication of what we think those words mean. And when we see people that we don't think fit into that model that's been established for us by the community, then we're more inclined to kind of poo-poo it.
Okay, so if a 65-year-old gay man comes in and identifies as boy Alexander, for instance, he's a boy, he's a leather boy, but he's 60-something years old. It's kind of incongruent with ideas that we have about sirs and boys and so forth, and just the word boy is usually in vanilla language referring to a young person. Do we discount that, or do we just wrestle with it?
Here's to me a better example. If the same gay 65-year-old man came into his first munch and identified himself as a master, we would assume that he came from another community. Like, we are already making that assumption about what that label entails. If it's his first event, because of his age, we are more inclined to give him the benefit of the doubt in terms of his experience and his prowess than we would a 21-year-old who maybe has been around for 3 years.
I'd say, yeah, that's probably a good example of ageism. Do we have... we've talked a lot about young people. Do we have ageism directed in the other direction? Are there people, you're too old to be doing this, or I would never play with somebody that old because I'd be afraid they'd have a heart attack, or I can't invest myself in a relationship with somebody at that age because they don't bear children, they don't have the same goals as I do, they're not going to be around for that much longer. Is there a thing against old people that we have in a different way, but in the same principle?
I mean, I think I have those attitudes in a lot of ways, and I catch that stuff come up. And it's not quite as pronounced as what you're saying, Michael, as far as I'm afraid they're going to have a heart attack or they're going to die soon or something like that. But there's just something to it that says to me, I'm not going to really be that interested in this person. They're just not going to have anything exciting to offer to me. They're old. They're tired. They're not that excited about life. Like, those are the kind of beliefs that I carry at some point somewhere in the back of my head. And I'll notice if I'm in a group of people and there's a couple older people and a couple people who are closer to my age, I'll just sooner pick up a chat with the people who are my age than the older people, because there's something in the back of my head that says, you're not going to get as much from those older people because they're not at your intensity level, your energy level. So the beliefs, I think, are more subtle than, for me, they're more subtle than the ones you outlined. I'm not thinking that they're going to die. Maybe underneath that they're there, but.
Yeah, but those assumptions that you make about older people, like, oh, they're going to be, like, they won't be able to make it through the play party. They're going to be, at 11 o'clock, it's time to go. I need to...
Yeah, I mean, here's one.
I need to get back to watch Leno.
Here's a simple one for me. Old people are boring.
Old people are boring.
They're
Old
boring.
people are set in their ways.
They're set in their ways. They're not open to new experience. Yeah, there you go. Those beliefs are something that might keep me from just engaging. And even if I do engage, I might not engage as authentically as I would with someone who's closer to my age.
Okay.
My experience is very interesting, I think. I have met a lot of people who are younger who are very interested in me as, for lack of a better term, an elder, not necessarily old, but who will come and approach me about playing or having an experience because they understand my experience in certain things, but are going to be less inclined to want to have a relationship. Like,
you're
experience.
You're good enough to play
them.
with. But you're not good enough to. You're good enough to play with, but you're not good enough to.
I wouldn't take you home to my parents.
Right. Okay.
You know what I mean? But I think that that's as much a broader social thing than limited to the munch.
Yeah, that's probably the case. As far as people in the outside world that, well, she's young enough to have a little, fling or affair with or something, but hang on just a second, my phone's going crazy here. But I could never bring her around my other friends. What would people say? Certainly I couldn't bring them home to my family. We probably all have a little bit of something like that. The idea of, if I got involved with this person, what would other people say? Yeah. That's baggage that we carry. Concern about our image and what other people think about us, or the assumptions that they'll make.
Yeah.
I do find it maybe a little less common in this community than I do out. Of course, I haven't really been out in the vanilla world at large. Like, most of my friends are kinky. I kind of have a skewed perspective on this sometimes, but it seems to me like, as far as age gaps go, you're talking about a 40-year-old woman with a 25-year-old man, you go, But
it's interesting because in the vanilla world, one of the things that I find is that age seems to be self-segregating. Like, old people will go to a bar that's full of 21-year-olds and go, nah, not my scene, and go find someplace else. There's not a lot of 22-year-olds that hang out at Jim Porter.
Right.
Ah, shit.
Yeah, they all hang out at Phoenix Hill.
What?
Well, that's because they got the arm strength to get in a fist fight.
So we do the same thing, except we all go to the same place, and then we kind of segregate ourselves within that place. We all will still go to Beer Nose, but then we look for people who are like us, and that's not always based on age. I imagine that's on a number of factors, how we sort of separate ourselves. But I guess it's kind of like, to me, it's kind of the difference between prejudice and racism, in that prejudice is something that can't necessarily be helped. It's kind of a product of baggage and assumptions and your sum of experiences that you carry around with you, whereas racism is sort of an active act of, discrimination, or it's a more conscious action rather than a mind crime, I guess. And when we're talking about age and ageism and so forth, there are probably people who have ageist attitudes up here, but do we really see a whole lot of? Do we really have a whole lot of?
Yeah, I'm the only one. Yeah.
Do we have a whole lot of ageist actions in our community, like actively, bad things because of age? You don't belong here. Or
I suffer from ageism.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'll tell you up front, I have an easier time talking to enthusiastic younger people who care to listen to what I have to say, because I meet a lot of people who reach a certain age where they already know everything. There's like this gap between 15, when everybody knows everything, and like 30 or 35 when they're sure they know everything. There's like this window in the middle where you can actually catch them and, have interesting discussions where you think you're actually kind of passing something along that's of value.
All right. So you have a sort of teacher thing, I guess. That.
To some extent, yeah.
Yeah. I'd agree with that. People that I like talking to you, Shane, because we're both kind of along the same way. We don't sit down to say, oh, I'm going to pick this person's brain, but we're sort of at the same level of life experience, the same vague age and so forth. But I like to teach, and when people sit down at a munch with me and say, well, I'd like to know about this, and how does that work, and I've only been doing, I like to have those conversations, but I don't necessarily find that is mostly young people who are doing that with me. Yeah. It's just new people.
Right, but that's not really fair, because your quote-unquote position, you become a general point of contact. So you become the person who by default knows everything and everyone. Whereas for me, I don't have that position, so I tend to be able to approach people as opposed to them approaching me.
Okay.
And what I'm saying is I tend to approach people I think that are going to be receptive to the kinds of things I want to talk about, which typically isn't old people.
Right.
When I say
that-
typically, I mean there are definitely some of them out there that do. I love having some conversations with people who are my age and older, but I tend to feel like I'm making more headway in terms of
brainwashing.
from education than I do with people who are older.
You like other people to think the way that you think, so you pick them off the tree rather than out of the barrel.
Well, this is going live, so I can't really say brainwashing, but I'm not saying brainwashing.
Okay. Well, I think there's something to that. I mean, as far as like presenters, Shane, you've presented places before. I presented places. We might have other presenters here. You know, there's a teaching thing that some of us have, that some of us enjoy. And I think anybody would be lying to you if they told you that it didn't have something to do with, you know, you like to have a voice in the discussion. You like to have you have a pulpit in order to put forth your ideas about kink or relationships or the best way to make a bullwhip or, you know, whatever it is that you're teaching about, that you do like to, you know, spread your word, because you know that there are a lot of other words out there that you don't necessarily agree with. You know, mold the community into a place that you think is better, because the ideals and the opinions that you have, you think are more enlightened. I don't disagree with that, Shane. I feel the same way sometimes. But are you making an assumption, Shane, that older people that are in the community, whether they're brand new or not, that you're saying that younger folks, since you're the person sort of going to them and starting conversations or helping people along, are you just dismissing old people because you feel like either A, they already do know it all, or B, they think they know it all and they're not going to be receptive to your ideas?
It's really become a product of my experience, which is, you know, I very rarely sit down and talk to one person. That seems kind of isolating to me. So I tend to sit at a table and just talk to, you know, whoever's at that table. And what I have found over time is that people kind of in that particular age window seem to just be more receptive. They seem to be more active listeners. And so I guess if you get beat with the same hammer long enough, you start to avoid that hammer.
Okay.
I mean, that's really all it is. It's not that I target people or anything. It's just that my experience has been, you know, when put in a group dynamic, there are certain people, in this case, sort of segregated by age, that seem to be more actively engaged in what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
So the difference between that and ageism.
No, I said up front, Frank. That's me being ageist. That's me having, you know, a collection of experiences that has led me to be more inclined to speak to somebody of a certain age. Right? That I'm saying up front, that's ageism, yeah. But it's really a function of my experiences as opposed to something that was ingrained.
Right.
Right.
It's not something that you have against older people.
No,
you know?
it's kind of developed, I've noticed.
Okay.
But, you know, as I get older, everybody's younger, so maybe that changes too.
Yeah, 20 years from now, Shane, you're going to have quite the you know, you'll be holding court at the Munches with many younger people. Most of the people will be younger than you by that time.
And I will change my name to Hugh Hefner.
Yeah.
So is it our responsibility, even if that's from part of our experience, because I don't know if I have the same experience, but I hear that a lot of any type of ageism, racism, some of it stems from experience, a mixture of cultural beliefs that are out there mixed with our own experience. Is it our responsibility to kind of pull that out and be aware of that and to maybe fight against that in some ways, to not exclude someone, or is it not, or is it just enough to be aware of it, or what?
Is it benign, like it's not something that needs fixing? Should we be striving for less ageist attitudes within ourselves?
I think, first of all, we have to decide if it's really a quote-unquote problem. right? I mean, we talked about that being a social function in our community anyway, more so than a systemic quality. But I'll tell you one thing that I've learned is that if I try to force myself to do something that is not in my nature to do, like let's say I have noticed that I only talk to people of this age or of this hair color or whatever it is, and I think to myself, wow, that seems exclusionary. I'm going to pick somebody who's a different age with a different hair color and go talk to them. It invariably ends badly for me, right? And what I have found is that, to me, the real problem is not that we do these things, it's that when we do these things to the exclusion of all else. Because like I said, I've had some great experiences. I've made some great friendships with people who are of my age or older. So it's not that I'm not open to it, it's just that it's not in my, it's not my default necessarily to approach those people based on the kinds of things that I'm interested in.
Well, okay. I mean, I think, yeah, and I don't think it's anyone's default to approach people that are out of our comfort zone. I don't think that's
right.
true.
But the thing is those people still make it into my lives. I'm not bigoted in the sense that I shut them off. And that's what I was talking about people who literally have a list that says, I'm 25. If you're 35 and older, I will not speak to you.
Yeah. Well, is it kind of a preference, I guess? I mean, when we're talking about, let's say, people that were generally interested in chatting up or dating or something like that. Well, you know, some people prefer blonde girls with big tits, you know, and it seems like that's all they're interested, like, to the exclusion of all of the other wonderful people that are out there in this world. It seems like that's kind of a criteria for them to be involved. Now, I might have my own preferences about people that I'm romantically involved with, but it's not to the exclusion of other people. So if you look at it that way, like Shane, do you just have a preference to be around younger people for a certain, you know, in that case for a certain reason? But because it's not to the exclusion, you're not closed off to everybody else, then it's not a problem.
Well, it's not so much that I'm not closed off. My experience dictates that even in my personal relationships, that I have dated people who are older than me, right? It's not just like I like it as an idea, it's a great theory. I mean, it's actually happened. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, you know, people can look at the people I'm involved with now and say, well, he's just attracted to young people. I say, no, I'm attracted to them.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, I kind of have the same thing, too.
but the issue is, like, before I was involved with Megan, the girl that I was involved with was 43, or 43 at the time. She was older than me by a year, and I was perfectly happy in that relationship, and she was awesome.
Right.
You know, I mean, it's not, I don't exclude anybody, but from me personally, we enter relationships for the feelings that they give us, and, you know, if I get those same feelings of feeling like, you know, especially in a power exchange relationship where I'm getting that kind of power exchange and I'm able to do that kind of, you know, babbling, opining, and philosophizing that I do, and their eyes don't glaze over, that's going to be a plus, regardless of their age. And in a social context, regardless of their gender.
Okay. Anyone else have something to add? All right.
Yeah, I've been babbling. I want to hear more from the young people.
I know. Shy, do we still call you a young person?
I think we only have one.
I
don't feel like a young person.
From where I'm standing.
Yeah, from where I'm standing, you're pretty young, Shy. I'm going to fill up my coffee and break for nature, but you guys carry on the conversation. I'll be right back.
Coffee is a break for nature as far as I'm concerned. So, Shy?
Yeah?
How do the old people fuck it up for everybody?
Come on.
Huh?
It's breaking up. Why is it breaking up?
I don't know, because it didn't work out.
What?
Well, why does anybody break up?
And we got the state fair in town, and everyone uses their cell phone for everything, so I don't know how good my signal's going to be. I am in BFE, Wyoming.
Yep.
I just don't know what to say right now.
What's that?
I just don't know what to say right now. That's the silence.
Oh. Well, I was really glad that you joined because I know that you have some opinions on it, mostly from the perspective of, you know, feeling like you're in a situation where you do feel excluded. I mean, the problem with me being on this conversation is I feel like I'm at an age, or at least I started at an age, where I really fit into the middle of everything. So I never got it from one side or the other.
I definitely didn't quite go that route with things.
You know, I feel very fortunate in that sense because you know, when I came in, you know, when I was here, I was in my really early 30s. So, you know, that's really kind of the tail end of the 20s. I'm okay, but I'm past that age where people who are older kind of look at you like you're a college kid. So I hit this real cushy window of, you know, the right age to come in.
I have the plus side of already knowing so many people and already being trusted and having a background, not necessarily in this sense, just as a person, that it wasn't quite as bad. And some people noticed, other people didn't, but it was big to me. My third thing ever going to, a bunch of people were being led around and introduced. And I was like, wait, what? Because they were introduced as newcomers. And I'm sitting there at a table, my third time ever being anywhere. And they're like, oh, you don't count. Everyone knows you now. You're good. So I'm on this really weird tail end of, though yes, I fit into that category, people also know me, and I've been around long enough that
There we go.
there is still fear to people who don't know me, but those who do know me can usually vouch for me. And it's not as... And as we've been stating multiple times, oftentimes it's just perception of, oh, well, this person is this way, so clearly they match every other person who is that way ever. Ha ha. Which isn't true. You really do have to get to know someone. But it truly just has come down to perception, which is one of the reasons why I don't just outwardly state, like, hi, I'm Emma and I'm X years old. Because if people actually get to know me first, they don't usually assume, though yes, they know I'm younger.
Right, and you're protective about your age. Is that because you are afraid of specific judgments? If you say,
it is multiple reasons.
You know, somebody asks your age right away, you're like, maybe when I know you better. Like, you want them to know you first before you tell them your age, so that they don't
jump to conclusions.
That some people did me in ways that they didn't have when I was younger because of other people lying about my age.
Right. Well, yeah, I know that was part of the reason, because you're like, I've been on FetLife for a little while already, and people...
No.
Or, you know...
1 a.m. on my birthday. So no, that wasn't the thing.
You were afraid that people would be able to do the math.
No, I joined 12:01 a.m. on my birthday. Like, that wasn't a big deal. It was more the issue of if I told them then, other people had already lied saying, like, oh, she's this age, about me. And I didn't want to necessarily discredit them and then also be labeled myself as a liar. And
cause a problem for them. Sure.
Kids that's playing,
Mm-hmm. All right. We had a topic in the Kink Tank when it was a more active discussion group before I killed it. About the idea of age requirements, and you know, it was something that I remember what it was. We were having a littles party at the Mix, and they were appalled at the idea that we were bringing children into the dungeon space. They obviously didn't understand the idea of littles, that these were actually adults. But that person sent me a very long rant that they had very specific ideas about the fact that even 18 and older and 21 and older events, that is not raising the bar high enough. And I hear this a lot less these days, but I used to hear the idea that, well, if we could make it a 25 and older thing, we would, you know, and everybody's got a different idea of where that bar is. That to me sounds very smacks specifically of ageism in that way. I mean, we have an 18 and over policy for our events for reasons that aren't just like that's where we think it's okay for people to get involved with the community. That's not where the 18-year-old thing came to be. But some people have a higher bar. Some people, you know, it's kind of like people who believe that people over a certain age shouldn't be able to get their driver's license renewed, or they should have to, you know, take proficiency tests or eyesight tests or something after a certain age. That's kind of an ageist attitude as well. How much active ageism, you know, we don't have it like as a policy as a group. We try to stay away from those things. We have certain boundaries in place for legal reasons or for, you know, public opinions reasons. But there, you know, we're talking about it being more social. How much social ageism do you see in our community? Just people that don't respect young people, don't think that old people should be involved. You're too old for this. You're gonna, you know, have a heart attack. You know, nobody wants to see you naked. Whatever it is. How much of that do you see in our community? I can think of a handful of people that I feel are ageist.
Without wanting to out people, Michael, I saw more of that when there were more groups in town.
When there were more groups in town, okay?
I'll let you interpret that historically as you.
I know where you're coming from, but you're saying that
it seemed like it was a crowd that definitely catered to a certain power dynamic, a certain gender preference, and a certain age to a large extent.
Okay.
It definitely seemed to be an older crowd that may not have had a policy, but certainly their welcoming vibe, you know, was such that.
Okay. Anyone else? And I'm not asking for specifics, and I definitely don't want names, but you know, are there examples? I mean, I'm thinking of an example of, you know, there's kind of like when you're there came a time in your life where when you meet your boyfriend's parents or you meet your girlfriend's parents, that you don't call them Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so. You know, when they were driving you out to the movies. There's never going to be a time when I do that. There'll never be a time what?
I don't know if it was my years in the Army or what it is, but there is never a time in my life when I will not talk to people I don't know as Mr. or Miss.
Okay.
I mean, I call my coworkers sir and ma'am.
Okay.
I also call them other names, but
not to their face.
Their backs have different names than their fronts.
I agree with Shy on that though, and I know I am still in the younger crowd, but even friends.
Can you speak up a little bit, Emma? I'm sorry. Speak up slightly.
I have to agree with Shy on this one.
Okay.
Even I understand that I'm on the younger side, fine. But I was also raised. I've had people's parents that are like, "Oh, call me Sue and Billy Bob," and I'm like, "No, I'd really prefer to at least, you know, be formal." And that also might have to do with upbringing, and like Shy said, it might be military. So it could be something of that nature, but that's not necessarily true.
It's just like the nurses and the whatever call patients by their first names when they're talking to them, but I always call them Mr. or Miss when I'm talking to my patients.
Okay.
It's
my experience was, you know, even as like a kid growing up in the neighborhood, you know, you meet the adults next door, and of course they're Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so. You don't call them by their first names. The kids that you play with down the street, when you meet their parents, they're Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so. but my neighbor that just moved in.
Only things I ever called other people's parents by were their Mr. names or mom and dad.
Okay.
Because I have several sets of parents from my friends.
Right. I just, my experience growing up anyways, there was a time where that changed for me, where I became an adult and Mr. and Mrs. kind of went by the wayside. The new person that moves in down the street from me now, I don't refer to them as Mr. and Mrs. We're on a first name basis if we introduce. But
they also introduce themselves that way.
That's true. Or they might, when you were younger, they might insist. If I went to my friend's house up the street and said, hey Carol, can you make us some popcorn? They would have been offended by it. Like, excuse me, no, I'm Mrs. So and so. You don't call me by my first name. No. Teachers have always been kind of the same way, although it seems more like, first names are more common, preceded by a Mr. or Miss. I guess if I were a teacher, my students would probably call me Mr. Michael.
As opposed to everybody else?
Right. Funny story, probably not for the broadcast, but I think I noticed it most with partners of mine. So, girls that I was dating in high school, you go over, you meet the parents, and Mr. and Mrs. this and that and whatever, and that's how you always refer to them. But at some point now, when I meet parents, it's not that way. There's not the presumption that I'm going to call them Mr. or Mrs. something something whatever. That I think is definitely a function of my age. They look at me now and say, I'm not introducing myself to this person as Mrs. something something. He's a grown-ass man. And so there's a different expectation of, I don't know if that's respect or if that's just tradition that gets carried over. But in our community, there are people that introduce themselves differently to others based on their age. I've seen that happen.
I've never seen it in the community, though.
I have. It would be the same. Yes, it would be this. It would be the same as if I said to Emma when she came to the munch, "It's very nice to meet you, Emma. I'm Mr. Michael. I'm pleased to meet you." And then when Frank came to his first munch, I said, "Hey, Frank, I'm Michael. Glad you came out." It may even be subtle, and it may even be because I see Emma as a younger person and Frank as more my age peer. But I think for some people it's even on purpose. It's like there's a certain respect that they insist on because of their age from younger people as opposed to people that are more similar to their age. No? Nobody? All right. Well, let's get off.
I've never experienced it, so.
Okay. Probably because you're an older guy.
Well, no, but I mean, I pay attention. I pay attention in the social context to see what other people are doing, and I'm not saying I've never experienced it. I'm saying I've never seen it.
Okay.
I've seen it a few times in the community specifically.
Really?
Yeah, well, just blatant conversations about, well, young people this and young people that. I mean, that's,
I really meant more the Mr., Ms.
Oh, no, I think I was going, Michael, was your general question?
No, go ahead with your topic. I mean, I that's one thing that I noticed. You've noticed something else now, and that is that there's grumbling sometimes about young people this or old people that.
Well, I don't hear old people that. I do hear I've heard some grumbling about younger people, or maybe just not even grumbling necessarily as like just blatant judgments and categories of young people this and like that. In fact, there was a group discussion that was all entirely based on these kids these days and, their sense of entitlement. I mean, it's just, that was a whole group dynamic that we all partook in, and essentially was just propagating a bunch of beliefs about an age group and to exclude them. And that was the point.
These kids
we're different than them and we're better than them for this reason. I mean, that's kind of blatant ageism, I thought.
I agree. I've kind of given up on the idea that that's something that can be fixed because I think that's as old as time itself. It was really interesting. documentary, a World War II documentary that I was watching, where this very old man who is a veteran of Normandy was talking about having enlisted, and his father had fought in the First World War, and his father told him that he shouldn't go. For a number of reasons. One of those reasons was his generation were a bunch of big pussies, and they were doomed to failure. They were not tough enough. They didn't have, these character qualities that are required for the rigors and the cauldron of combat. And that's a World War I vet talking to a World War II vet. A World War II vet we often refer to as the greatest generation, the people that defeated Hitler and built the world as we know it. They were criticized when they were young, up-and-coming enlistees that they weren't hard enough and they didn't show the respect and they didn't have their shit together. It just impressed upon me that nothing is new under the sun. This happens and it will continue to happen. I'm trying to resolve for myself that I'm not going to grow up to be one of those people. That's young people this and whippersnappers and I don't want to turn.
Lawn.
What's that?
Get off my lawn.
Yeah, I don't want kids these days, and I even see that on Facebook posts. People lamenting their childhood and whatever. And of course, kids these days, they were all raised on the internet, which of course I wasn't. So they're all desensitized to porn. They all expect instant gratification. They want everything right now, and that's why they can check the master checkbox, because they don't feel like they need to earn it. They just say it so they can hide behind their internet anonymity. There used to be a thing called integrity that's gone now, and I hate that shit. And it never changes. I don't know if it's ever going to go away. I don't think so, because it's been going on forever. What makes me think I can have something to do with changing that?
I love it. I love it. Yeah. No, I'll tell you exactly why. Because I don't see it from my perspective as being a function of age. There are certain attitudes or beliefs or behaviors that I see in young people that are not exclusive to young people. If I heard those same things coming from somebody who was older, I would have the same opinion. It's not related to age. One of the things that I have found is when I'm around people who are younger, who aren't kind of loud and obnoxious and I know everything, I tend to find that those are the people who really I see develop character. And even the ones who are loud and brash, when I see them at first, I can sometimes see them mellow, right? You see the maturing happening. I sometimes see it, though, where I've seen people who started at 25 and are behaving exactly the same at 35.
I just think it's funny that you use loud and brash as a measuring stick for maturity.
How about obnoxious? Is that better?
Okay, so it's not necessarily how loud they speak or how crude or brash they are.
Of the loud.
Okay.
Yeah, and crude is one of them. And
Okay.
again, this is really more outside of the kink realm, but I have just found that I have found a lot of people that I talk to that really know how to have a good time. They've just learned how to become really subtle and subversive about it.
Okay.
So they're having the same amount of fun and doing the same obnoxious stuff. They're just not offending the table next to them.
Well, I have seen that. That is a good example of ageism that I've seen. Maybe you guys can observe this sometime when we're at a munch. It's generally, I think it goes both ways, though. I think it's young people have this thing about old people, and old people have this thing about young people. If we're segregated into those areas, you have a table of youngish, younger people over here, table of oldish, older people over here. Inevitably, at a munch, something happens. There's a topic of conversation, and everybody explodes in laughter, and it's actually kind of loud and disruptive, and a hush goes around the rest of the room because they're like, Jesus Christ, what are they doing over there? But sometimes I'll see the younger people watching the older people, explode in laughter like that, and I get this kind of, oh, gee, like, shut these fucking people up. Like, do you see we're not trying to have a conversation? We're trying to enjoy ourselves here. Like, what's the matter with you old people? But it works the other way, too, where I see The younger people explode in you don't even know what they're talking about. It doesn't matter. They're not even, you don't know what they're laughing about. They just suddenly are having a really good time and have disrupted the whole room, and the people at the oldish table will be like, there's a big eye roll, like, oh, there's fucking kids here, That's something you might actually be able to observe next time. Next time that happens at a munch, watch the table that it's happening at, and then watch the tables around it, because it's never, if you're the one having a good time, you're never the immature. You're never the immature, disruptive, inconsiderate table. You're just having a good time. Well, when it's someone else, and I think it's mainly around age than it is anything else. People go, these old people, these whippersnappers, whatever.
I think that's an interesting observation, and I think it's really. I think it points to me, it points to the importance of looking at these things and doing whatever we can to kind of just at least be aware of it, because there is a sense of disconnection there in that example that you just drew up there. There's kind of a barrier that maybe is not there on the surface, but just pull one layer underneath, and all of a sudden, that's almost like the way the outsiders were looking at us. We were making a disturbance. The age gaps may see each other as insiders and outsiders, and the point of it is, for me, I'm right in the middle, right? I'm in the sweet spot. I'm not too young. I'm not too old. I'm not any particular target in these groups, and neither are most of the people here, except for Emma, that I see. But but I think it benefits all of us. We get the most out of it when those disconnections are not there, so that we can learn from the younger people, learn from the older people, and the middle people too. Those barriers actually really limit our whole group as a community. So I think this example you just gave really points to me the importance of having this discussion and doing, what you said earlier, Michael. Ageism is there; it's time immemorial. So is probably racism and classism and all those things. But that doesn't mean to me that I don't do anything about it, or I don't think about it, or I don't try to talk about it to try and change it, especially when we have a small community where actually the things that we do and we say and we try actually have a pretty big impact, at least on our small community.
Right. Well, I kind of feel that way about drama in the community. People, different groups talk, I don't like that group, it's so dramatic, there's too much drama with it, or whatever. Every now and then things will happen in our community. I think it's pretty easy to avoid. I think we have a really good group for that. And just because we do have a pretty good group for that, because it isn't full of drama everywhere at every turn, and just because I don't think it's something that can be eradicated altogether, doesn't mean that we shouldn't strive to minimize it. Keep it to an acceptable, work to keep it low, so as not to, spread rumors or fan flames or, start new problems and so forth. And I think ageism is something that people that are involved in this conversation right now obviously either have a stake in learning something about it, or who feel like they're a victim of it, or, I think all of us, just by virtue of being here and talking about it, that it's something that we realize, just like classism, racism, etc., that it's not good. And, if we can contribute in subtle ways for improving the situation, maybe you can't get rid of it entirely. But I don't know if that should stop us from trying to improve it, even in very subtle ways. Now, here's an interesting thing about the way that this format is working. I'm going to derail for just a little bit. I've been watching. I don't know. Can you guys tell how many people are watching us right now?
I don't think so.
Okay. I have a little thing on my dashboard that tells me that we have 2 people that are not in this room that are watching us, somewhere on the internet. And that's pretty well. Now we have 1. So maybe because I called them out. But I don't know who that one person is, and that's cool. They might be part of our group. They might be just, sitting watching. I was hoping for more. At one point we had 3. I hope that we can grow that number at some point. But what I wanted to do, I think, for this format going forward, there's a little application on here that I can solicit questions and answers from the audience that we can talk about, live on air. Questions from people that aren't part of this conversation right now, but who are watching us. So I just opened the Q&A, and it looks like we do have, let's see, no question, no specific. I think they were typing in there like it was a chat, like they thought that we would be seeing this in real time. Oh. So these might even be like old comments. So we have 2 viewers right now, and what I'd like for them to do, if they're still watching or paying attention, we do have that Q&A app that's open, and I believe you can access it if you're on your computer by hovering up above your screen, like along the top part of the screen there. There is a button there to sort of open the Q&A window or to turn on the Q&A app. And we'll continue our discussions here, but I'd like to give whoever is watching this broadcast a chance to ask questions that they might have. And if we get a few of them in, or if we get some serious ones or ones that we haven't covered already, then we can address those. So if we build this into having quite an audience, which I think it has the potential to have, we've had some really good discussions in this Kink Tank thing starting from a few months ago. We might get some really good feedback and some input from people that are, not in the room with us, but are watching elsewhere on the internet, maybe even other parts of the world. Anyways, let's go on. So I'm soliciting questions right now. We'll give it some time for those to come in, but in the meantime, let's talk a little bit about aging in the community. Not ageism per se, but what are some of the things that affect people as they age within the community, or what are some of the things that are, I'm not just talking about physical aspects. As you get older, you might have to, if somebody's tying you up with rope, there might be extra considerations for your joints or, whatever it is. Those are considerations for sure. Maybe we could talk a little bit about those. But are there other considerations, landmines, problems, benefits, etc., to aging in the community?
Retiring, having more free time.
I hadn't thought of that one. That's a really good one. So if you are retired and you have all kinds of time to come to events, get involved with things, you don't have work, you probably don't have kids at home, although you may watch your grandkids or whatever. You have a lot of disposable time that maybe some other people in the community don't.
I think one of the ones that I've noticed, and it doesn't apply to me, but I've seen it in other people that are in my sort of age category, is the ability to be out, established in their career. Like you said, their kids have moved out, and so it's a little bit easier for them to be a little bit more free in their discussions or conversations, the events they attend. You get a lot of people who are younger who live at home or in shared situations or a little bit more nervous about their, job prospects. Again, it's not universal, but I have seen that as people age and kind of brush up against some of those sort of earlier fear factors of, getting outed, that they've realized that some of that impact was a lot more imagined than real and tend to be a lot more out.
Either that or they're retired and they don't have those same.
Right, but I'm saying I did say people in my age category.
Yeah.
Like I did say, there is an element of kind of moving from 25 to 45 where, like you said, you might be in a situation where your kids have moved out, you have less to protect in that sense. It's just you now. It's not how is this going to affect my kids or whatever else. There's a certain element, or your kids are old enough that they may still live at home, but they're of adult age where you don't have to be quite as judicious in your we're hanging out with friends on a Friday night, which is, of course, is true, but it's still a misdirection.
Yeah, and you don't have to worry about those custody issues, for instance, with exes, because your kids may be autonomous.
I just find that I hit an age where people that are my age, I know more of their real names than their screen names.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Agree. Mm-hmm. I think that's a change that's happening in the community at large, old and young as well. I also, but talking about, touching on what you were talking about, the idea of, older people sort of coming to the realization that maybe they didn't need to be as careful about being out or about their identity being discovered, etc. I think some of that might have to do with the fact that they've either arrived where they've been trying to get, career-wise or family-wise. They've already arrived, so it might have been important before, but it's less important now.
Well, that's what I mean. I mean, a lot of those perceived risks have been bypassed already as a function of establishment or, that comes with age.
Yeah,
you own your own house. You don't have to worry about what your landlord thinks, for example.
Right.
Those kinds of things.
But then there's also, when I was of a certain age, I had in my mind what I wanted to do for a living, and I had ideas. People do change that over time. So if I'm a college student and what I really want to do is get into politics, and I want to be a congressman or senator or president of the United States or something like that, I have that ambition. That's something that I'm striving to do. I'm going to be very protective about my identity if I'm going to get involved with the BDSM community, because I have not because the risks right now are real, but because the potential for later on down the road is much higher. Not just because of my aspirations and because I want to be an elected official or office holder, but because I have a lot more road ahead of me for these problems to culminate. So I think that, teaching prudence for younger people who, haven't arrived where they want to be, or their path may change, and they're saying, well, I'm getting into the porn industry, so I don't really care. I can be as out as I want to. I have worse skeletons to talk about than my involvement with the BDSM community. But by the time they're 24 years old, they've changed their path, and now they're going into a different corporate culture where all of a sudden the choices that they've been making for the last 5 years could come back and really bite them in the ass. They don't know necessarily where they're going to end up, whereas older folks in the community have either already arrived there or they're pretty firmly on a path that's going in a certain direction. Do you agree?
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody have comments on that?
Well, I don't know. I think I agree with that in that it is a difference that once you're older, that's less of a something to be concerned about. I wonder about the part about talking to people about that. I don't know. I wonder how much I want to, if we're me, temper my experience and maybe just keep it. I probably would maybe in like the first month or two be like, you might not want to do something that might damage your long-standing reputation in the long term. But I think after a couple of months, 6 months to a year or something, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, am I just holding myself back from living in the moment for this? Who knows what's in the future? I'm not going to commit to anything that's going on right now and be part of what's actually my life is actually about. Right. Because I might want to sell out one day. That's my view. I understand.
Hey, but Frank, maybe it was inadvertent, but you actually said something really telling, I think, which is there is a point where you reach a certain age and your reputation is sort of established. There's a lot of young people who are still working on that. They want to create a perception that, they'll make a good employee or they'll make a good whatever. And I don't know about a lot of other people, but I know for me that there's a certain point where I was like, people know who I am, and adding this on isn't going to make much of a difference in their perception of me, because my reputation is already established.
Yeah, you're a known quantity, and
right.
So the revelation that you are into leather and kink and so forth isn't going to tilt somebody's perception of you to it's not going to skew it in a drastic enough way to really matter.
Exactly.
Okay.
Although, to be fair, most people thought I was kind of, weird anyway, so it doesn't really much matter.
Yeah, I like to keep people's expectations of me low for that reason.
Although I will say, though, that when I come out to certain people, it's that reputation that I rely on to make that transition for them accepting that easier. In the sense that I can say, you know who I am, this shouldn't make any difference. You did know it before, and it didn't alter your perception at all. Knowing this now shouldn't alter your perception either.
Okay. My personal experience has been that as I grow older, I find myself relying less on the validation of other people. So I feel like I can be more comfortable being out as I get older, not just because of my circumstances, but because I am not as concerned with what other people might think about my involvement in the kink community as I would have been, say, 10 years ago, where I wanted to keep it under wraps because if my family found out, then they would have changed their opinion of me. And maybe that's because I feel like I'm more of a known quantity and an established personality, and I feel like I have more bulletproof standing with these people. But I feel like internally it's because I care less now than I used to. And that's just my experience being older. Like, as I'm getting older, I don't know if is that a stereotype we can make? Do older people in general care less about validation from others? Or is that just me?
I have this firm belief that as you get older, all of the fucks you have to give eventually die off. They wither on the vine.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that might be more of a stereotype than, I don't know.
I can only speak from my own personal experience, Frank. I mean, like Michael said, I literally care less what people think of me now.
No, I meant Michael's statement.
Oh.
Right.
I think that really is variable on if you've done some kind of work on yourself or some kind of, work at that to put that, need for validation down. I'm not quite sure.
But that takes time.
It may come with time, but it may not either. I know plenty of people who are older and still are just as concerned about that.
Okay. So there's too many exceptions to that to make it a stereotype?
No, we can have a vote. What do you think?
Well, my opinion, though, Frank, is I don't disagree with you, but the problem is that work that you're discussing does take time. Right? Yeah. It's very difficult for people to have done that self-evaluation, and I know that you come from a place of experience where you've done it. This is not something that you think about in one night and it clicks. This is something that you spend years kind of dredging through the crap that's internal, where you realize where the things of value to you come from, and when you realize that almost all of them are internal, it changes your perception of how you care about what other people think. But that's a process, and that process takes time.
Yeah.
So even if you started it when you were 25, you're still likely going to be 30 before you kind of start really living that way.
Yeah, I agree. It does.
But you're right. You can be 40 and never reach that point, or never even start that process. But once you start that process, it's kind of a never-ending thing, and as you go through it, you start to care less.
Okay. This is kind of winding down, but I did want to give our viewers another chance because we've had 0 questions come in.
That's because we explained everything so well.
That must be it. I did want to open it up just one last chance here for the viewers that we have. If you hover over part of your screen on your computer, there's a place where you can open our Q&A app where you can submit a question for our 4 illustrious panelists to try and have a crack at for you. We're going to be ending this probably in about 15 minutes or so. So if you have questions and things that you feel like we haven't addressed in this particular conversation, or just an opinion to share, or I strongly disagree with so-and-so because why, feel free to submit that in the questions section. I'll be able to see what you submit here shortly, and we can have a go at it. But
especially if you disagree with them because of age.
Right.
I strongly disagree with Michael because he sucks.
Because I am an old codger who doesn't get those whippersnappers.
Clearly.
I don't know. I'm kind of leaving it open for you guys because I know that I had some ideas of what I wanted to talk about in this discussion, but are there experiences, anecdotes, issues, questions, things that we haven't really touched on here that you'd like to talk about? Tons of them, I see.
Is that for the audience?
No, that's for you guys.
That's for everybody. We're an all-inclusive group. We don't reject people.
Say that again, Emma.
That's for everybody. We're an all-inclusive group.
Exactly.
We do not reject.
Oh, I see. No, it's only for the old men on the panel, not the young ladies.
Damn it!
Your opinion doesn't
Michael,
have to be
the one thing I would like to say before we do end all of this is that a lot of the stuff that I talk about is theoretical or projection because, like I said, having been to some other communities and having seen even how this community has developed, this community, when we look at a lot of the negatives in other communities, tends to stack up fairly well. I mean, I really feel sometimes like I'm reaching for, you know, kind of some of these discussion topics because the experiences that I've had have been so good.
Right.
You know, that you know, I've seen people who have come in literally who are 18 and been treated reasonably well, and I've seen people who've come in at 65 without a day of experience and been treated really well. I mean, obviously there's going to be stories of people who feel like they were mistreated and they will apply some reason for that. I didn't get treated fairly because I'm young, or I didn't get, you know, because I'm, you know, the wrong power dynamic or whatever, and that's always going to happen. But in general, I think our community is probably one of the more open and accepting in terms of diversity that I've been involved with.
I agree. And I, like you, I kind of find myself, for purposes of this discussion and trying to examine all angles, trying to step outside the Louisville community for just a little bit and trying to, you know, play devil's advocate with some of these things.
Yeah, I think the reason I want to say that, though, is I don't want people who are listening thinking that we're having a meeting about how do we fix what's wrong. I mean,
Right.
If anything, we're talking about a tweaking in terms of making it better, not, you know, here's this long-standing issue that, you know, we're finally getting around to airing the dirty laundry. I mean,
Right.
I think we've got a great community as it relates to how people of various ages get along. I mean, I'll go to even a party, an 18 and over party, where I see 18-year-olds hanging out with 45-year-olds, and not because either one of them wants anything from each other. They just get along and want to hang out.
Yeah. Or dating each other, or playing together, or whatever.
Well, like I said, though, that gets into a bit of a different issue where people might have a different perception of why that happens. So I was trying to keep it more on a, you know, an open welcome to the community social level.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that'll probably be the case with most of the topics that we address here. It sounds like we're having this discussion so that we can fix this problem or find solutions to a problem, but really most of the discussions that we've had so far have been, you know, issues, even issues in other communities that I feel like maybe we ought to talk about before it comes to ours. And it seems like, you know, to the person watching, it's like, well, these guys are fucked up. They have all these problems. No, we don't. We're trying to talk it out before it happens, or it's, you know, it's kind of like that. We don't stop working on it. We don't stop trying to minimize some of the problems or issues that we might have in the community, even if I don't see them much as, you know, a big problem.
I think it's always good to let them see the light of day, as it were.
Yeah, and everything's fair game to talk about, whether it's a problem or not. Sometimes I might come with a topic because we really have a big issue that I feel like needs addressing or fixed or something, and we can try and, you know, hug it out in one of these conversations or something, but I haven't seen really any of that. I mean, I say it all the time. I'm very proud of our community and the way that it works. I don't think that we will have anecdotes of ageism and situations that have been problematic for some people. Somebody who was made to feel unwelcome because they were a whippersnapper or a geezer or something like that. But I don't think that that's because it's a systemic issue in our community where our community as a whole is unfriendly to this group of people or to that group of people. It's because we are open to everybody and all kinds of people, and some of them are ageist assholes, and some of them are racist assholes, and some of there are going to be people that have we have misogynistic people at our munch who feel very strongly about men and women in this way or something. They're welcome too, and their interest in kink, they're welcome. They're welcome to have their opinion. If we see bad behavior, we address it, but that doesn't keep people from having, shitty ideas in their head about old people or young people or black people or white people or rich people or poor people or whatever it is.
Yeah, and Michael, I would, think I agree. That it's great. I think our community does do a really good job, and it's good to spend some time to talk about that. We do a good job of bringing. I mean, we're having this conversation, right? That point alone. I do think that the points of any of the isms that are in the society at large, but certainly in our community, ageism, sexism, and classism, whatever it is, helpful, I think, to look at the subtleties of it rather than the necessarily, oh yeah, there's one person who's a misogynistic asshole and there's one person who's an ageist asshole, so that's really the issue. The rest of us are fine. I think that, I think it may be more helpful for our group as a whole to look at more of the subtleties of it. Where do those, well, I'm not a misogynistic asshole necessarily, but, I do have some, I've heard some very sexist conversations at coffee that they're not misogynistic asshole versions of sexism, but much more subtle of just refusing to see what the kind of sense of privilege there is. So just I just think the more focus on the subtlety rather than the big asshole in the room.
Well, yeah, because I think that's mostly where it lives.
In the subtlety.
Right. And,
the devil's in the details.
Yeah, we can work on those things. Like Shane was saying in one of our previous conversations when we were talking about kink shaming and kink acceptance, he brought up some very good, very subtle ways in which we kink shame. And I see that far more often. And maybe it's not as destructive as somebody just straight up saying, your kink is bad, immoral, dirty, nasty, whatever. But I never see that really happening. I see it more often in an aggregated, a cumulative total of subtle things that are ageist or...
Yeah, well, and if you ask me, the subtle ones are more destructive than the bad guy who's right out there, because the bad guy who's right out there, it's easy for people to go, oh yeah, just ignore that guy. And
yeah, he's not part of the culture. He doesn't affect the culture unless you get enough of those assholes into the room. Then you can have a change of culture. But he's an outsider. Whoever is an outsider that you can very easily identify and dismiss.
Right,
Don't and talk to that guy. He's an idiot.
And then I point the finger at that guy, I get to discount my own more subtle forms of ageism, sexism, racism, because I'm not that guy. That's the guy that you all need to look at, not me, just because I've got my little subtle, shaming, my little subtle stuff going on. That's more, I think that's way more, the subtle stuff is the real danger.
Well, and the subtle stuff, I think, molds the culture of the group more so than the blatant asshole guy that nobody can seem to stand to talk to.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
They're easily dismissed and easily muted, I guess. And usually after a little while, they don't end up coming back so much. Cause
they out themselves. They out themselves pretty quickly.
Yes, they do.
But that's why I said I like people who are loud and obnoxious and whatever, because it's very easy to get their opinion on things, and I can tell right away whether or not I'm going to get along with them or not.
Oh, look, we have somebody new that joined us just in the last trailing minutes of our conversation.
It's me.
Yeah, I can see your avatar there anyway. There you are. Got your cam on. We're actually winding down with this. Have you been watching as part of the viewership, or did you just came in?
No, I just saw the email come through.
Okay.
I'm usually at work right now.
All right. Well, this conversation is only going for another 7 minutes or so before we.
Okay, let's start over.
Yeah. Let's have a recap of everything that we've talked about.
Be inclusive. Don't reject people. People are confused no matter what age you are. And there we go.
Kumbaya and all that shit. Asha, you probably, I don't know, did you come into this with something that you were hoping that we'd talk about, or something that is kind of on your mind as it pertains to age?
No, I was just creeping.
Just want to come in and hang out?
Yeah.
That's cool.
Boredom relief?
Yes.
Not a good solution. It's we're kind of like the methadone to the heroin that is boredom.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose you could say that. We're not the most lively bunch. I think we've had some pretty good conversations about all this. Asha, when you came into the community, did you ever attend the early bloomers meetings there? I was thinking you did.
No.
You were never at early bloomers?
No.
Okay. Well, what did you feel like when you came into our community? Did you think that your age had anything to do with the way that you were treated when you introduced yourself to us?
I don't think so.
No?
No.
People just treated you like people and that was all good?
Yeah, people think I'm younger than I actually am anyways.
Well, that's an interesting thing, too, that, I wonder if there are people like that in our community who, or like Emma, people often think that you're a little bit older, either because they've known you since before you were legal, or because you don't fit what they had in their mind as what a typical young person acts like, or the way that they think. Has that benefited you in some way?
Yeah, there are selective people that I won't name names, and we know where I'm going with that, so we'll just leave it at that. But there are selective people who would not have talked with me and immediately friendly with me had I just come out with, "Hello, I am a number. Nice to meet you." Now,
Okay.
Was it me? Because I'd like to know.
You know what I'm thinking? It's really like, in my mind, thinking about sexism and ageism actually almost hard to separate, because I think of attitudes towards, let's say, younger men and older men versus younger women and older women.
That's something we haven't talked about yet. Let's get into
That's
that.
a really big thing. I mean, the difference of how the community treats exactly those four categories. They're kind of almost.
I mentioned it. You all glossed over it.
Did we? Sorry about that. I also, in addition to the old man, old woman, young woman, there's also old dominant, young submissive, old submissive.
I feel it's easier to come in as the latter when you're younger, especially, than it is the former.
Is my microphone even on?
Yes.
Because I covered this.
We touched on some of these things for sure.
Yeah. I am all over the touching on the young girls. I get it. But we've had this conversation.
Not about you, Shane. Not about
Did that come out right? I'm not sure that came out right, Shane.
Raising people.
So let's talk a little bit about privilege, okay? With all those permutations that we have about male, female, or some kind of queer, non-binary choice or identification, talking about gay or straight, top or bottom, old and young. Who do you think in our community has the most? Who do you think has it easiest? Let's just say that. Like, for instance, the young male doms, I think, get a little bit screwed.
No, but hold on though. I understand what you're saying, Michael, but we speak from our own perspective. So yes. I look at young dominants just getting the shit kicked out of them because they're talking to all these people who say, well, I want to play with somebody, I like you, but you don't have enough experience. Well, how can I get experience if I've never done anything and I can't get experience?
Right.
But if I had to be a young female submissive in this crowd, just getting fucking hammered with like, oh, are you single? Oh, I mean, it's like a fucking swarming movie.
Oh, I don't disagree that young submissive females might, have their own challenges, and so I'm not even saying that young male dominants have it hardest. So who do we think has it easiest?
Older male dominant.
Older male dominance. Older straight male dominance?
I don't know about that. I don't know.
Just older male dominance. We're the privileged ones?
Well, I mean, I think that we carry the male privilege, and older men certainly definitely carry privilege, and I don't think that changes all that much. And straight, those are your main three categories that come from the overall culture. I don't think it changes all that much in our community.
Okay.
Well, I think though the one area, and I basically mostly agree with you, Frank. The one difference that I will stand out is that I know that there's a lot of older male dominants, not the people who are here specifically, and not even in our community really, that have that perception of being, predators. Like they're just here to pick up the young women. They don't talk to anybody. They don't do, it's basically just a meat market. Like the community is just a place for them to hook up with people that they believe are going to do whatever they want.
Yeah, I think that would be a disadvantage to being an older male dominant in the community, whether it's a perception that's real or something that was born in our own community or something that is borrowed from other communities where it's a bigger problem, the whole chicken hawking thing. But does that outweigh, I think what Frank is saying is that, yeah, okay, maybe it comes with its own issues, but still, being an older male dom is kind of...
Here's who I think has it worse. My opinion, the worst. Older female dominance.
Older female dominance.
Because I think that they are more established in terms of, we've had this discussion, right? Self-evaluation, do you know what you want? What kinds of things are you interested in? They tend to be very secure in the kinds of things that they want, but younger men who are coming in have a harder time, I've noticed, self-identifying as submissive, and so they are less inclined to identify themselves, which narrows the pool of potential partners.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think that, younger female dominants or people who self-identify as female dominants who are younger tend to be okay simply because men still want to have that inclination to play with the younger women. So, like, if you had, an equal number of female dominants who are both young and old, so if you had an equal number of them, that more men would be inclined to want to play with the younger female dominants just because they're younger women.
Okay. Well, you are framing this in terms of availability of play partners, availability of...
But also desire.
Relationship possibilities. And I think that that's one area that is... worth looking at when we're talking about who has it easy or who has it tough as far as the supply and demand thing goes. But some of the most respected people in our community are older female dominants. That you might argue that they have it easy in that way.
Right, those two of them do.
Yeah. But how many older female dominants do we have?
Well, here's the point I'm trying to make.
It's a good percentage, is what I'm saying.
Because I had gotten into a very heated discussion with a female dominant who was older about on gender. We had a very heated discussion about gender, and we essentially wound up being able to hug it all out. And I got invited to a Club Femme party.
Mm-hmm.
And the number of people who go to Club Femme parties versus come to the Munch was a little bit startling in that why wouldn't they come to a Munch? And I've come to realize that because it was a more private setting, I think people felt more comfortable being able to come out and self-identify. And the pools that I saw there in terms of availability were very skewed, and there were a lot of women who were older that go to club femme parties because they feel welcome there, like that's their space, that don't come out to Louisville Munch events. Some you'll see every now and again, but very rarely.
That's really interesting, Shane. I mean, that's something I wonder why that is. Is there something about the community that doesn't make that feel welcome?
You don't fish in a pool. You go where the fish are.
We're getting some pretty bad echo here. I'm not sure.
Because everything is done twice.
Does somebody have their speakers turned up pretty loud where it's feeding back in? Actually, let me, because I think we can talk about this a little bit more. I'm going to mute each of you one by one.
Freebird!
Hang on. All right, we're going to mute Asha's mic, and we'll see. Oh, that got rid of it. Asha, you're the culprit.
Maybe it was the fan. I moved the fan closer to the computer.
Maybe. It seems now that...
How's that?
Maybe a little bit better. Just a trace echo. Not a big deal. Well, now it's a bigger deal. All right. Yeah, Asha, you're the issue. Do me a favor. I'm going to unmute your microphone. Would you mute it manually, and then you can just unmute it when you want to talk? Can you do that? Up at the top.
But there's an echo still now.
You find it?
It says it's muted anyways, I guess.
Oh, there you go.
There you go.
All right. So back to this, Frank, what you were talking about. You know, I find it interesting what Shane said about all this because I find that Munch groups, you know, Louisville Munch for 10 years was run by a dominant female. And she's a little older now than she was then. But even when she started, when she was 40, I think she was 40 when the Munch started, which puts her at least kind of in the middle ground, you know, over the 10 years, working her way through the years. But you would have thought that Louisville Munch would have been a breeding ground or a very comfortable place for female dominants to come and make their home, because the person who's running it is also female dominant of a certain age. And honestly, over the years, I mean, going back to when I first came in 2001, I don't see that that's changed. It hasn't had much of an effect. But then Shane goes to a different kind of party and sees that that is the environment. It has less to do with who's already, you know, part of the community or who's running the community or whatever. It has to do with some kind of, you know, private versus public atmosphere.
I think it has more to do because I know that they've gone about trying to have their own munches and stuff. I think it's really just about comfort level in a particular environment. And you were around long enough, Michael, to know that how many people did we ever see from Paradox come to a munch?
Yeah, it was
like, if you ever, I mean, you could go to the munches for 5 years and never know there was another group, and if you went, it would be an entirely different group, and you would ask yourself, well, why don't these people just come to the munch?
Mm-hmm. What do you, I mean, I don't want to get too far into it, but do you have an answer for that? Do you, in your mind?
Specifically, I think if I had to guess, I would say that the people that I met there held certain attitudes that were probably more exclusive and felt more comfortable sharing that in an environment that was designed to be more welcoming to their exclusive attitude. Okay. That was the nature of the discussion that we had.
So the idea, because it was a membership group as opposed to the open, I guess, gateway community that Constance was trying to, like, everybody come, you know, we want, you know, find the munch first, and then, you know, Paradox had, I mean, they had a process, and they had membership dues, and those kind of faded as the years went on. They became a more open group.
Right,
but it set a tone.
Except though, and this is the point I'm trying to make with your experience with Paradox, is that Paradox was a heavily male-dominant, female-submissive environment. Like, it was very difficult to go to a Paradox meeting and find a female-dominant, male-submissive couple.
Okay.
Right? So what happens is, if you want to have that dynamic, you go where that is going to be the culture. And the Munch is more wide open. My issue was that when I had talked to a lot of these people who were female dominants, they weren't female dominants in the same sense that we think about that. Like the same way that we might think about Constance. These were, women are superior, all men must bow to us, which is sort of a general philosophy that Club Femme carries. Now, I'm not saying everybody in that group carries that attitude, but what I'm saying is that people who have that attitude tend to congregate.
Okay. So you're saying that femdom culture or femdom is different than female dominant.
Well, yeah, I don't want to get into splitting that hair. I'm simply saying that there was a prevailing attitude, from my experience, similar to one that I saw in Paradox, where if you held certain beliefs, a more open environment actually narrowed the pool of what you were looking for.
Okay. Because the culture didn't feel friendly to certain groups of people, and it self-perpetuated.
Correct. And it continues to propagate, yes.
Okay.
And ironically, the groups that are exclusive tend to struggle, and the groups that are more open tend to thrive.
Well, I think we'd have to be careful about gauging success, for instance. If there are niche groups out there that like a certain dynamic or have a certain view that women are in charge and men are subservient by nature or whatever, that's going to appeal to a certain number of people, and those people are going to participate in their events. Those people are going to come to their parties. They're not necessarily looking for quantity over quality. If their Munch is 6 people, but it's 6 people that really align very closely together, and they can have an atmosphere that they feel, is where they belong, that's a successful group. So when you're saying struggling, are you talking about because of attendance? Or
I'm
struggling
simply saying
for
that
other
my
reasons?
experience was that the membership and the interest in these groups seems to have dwindled over time.
Okay. There's something about being very niche specific like that is less sustainable than having a more open group?
Well, I think what happens is, like you said, you find this, I want to be around a whole bunch of people that are like me. Mm-hmm. And what you start to find is that when you tend to be a little, that specific in what you're looking for, the people who are like you tends to narrow. I mean, we're just moving to a culture that's more open and accepting, and so holding more narrow views about what you believe is acceptable in a social context is starting to dwindle.
Okay.
I see a lot less stuff online, for example, about that sort of really militant femdom kind of attitude, and I don't think it's because it's gone away. I think it's just because people have realized that it's narrowed their options. I might be interested in being a submissive to a female dominant, but not one who thinks that I'm submitting to her because she's better than me.
Yeah, or because she's female and that's the way it ought to be.
Right.
Right. Ladies, do you have some opinions? I'd like to hear from you about who has it easiest and who has it toughest in this community. Any opinions there? Who gets the shaft? Switches always get.
Wait, those exist? No, I'm kidding. Those aren't real things. No.
Who do you see in our community, especially coming from a female perspective or younger perspective? And Asha, I really don't know how old you are, but I think I probably am guessing that you're younger than you really are now that you said that.
She's 93 and she lives in Antarctica.
They must have some.
Have you not seen my age?
I know how old you are, but
okay.
But let's just say from a younger female perspective, or let's say a younger perceived female perspective, where do you think the privilege lies in, not just in our community, let's, your observations? You think that old dominant women have it roughest? Do you think that young submissive men? Do you have an opinion?
That 30s people tend to just be perfect roundabouts because some of them can still fit into the younger and older, and no one really questions them.
Okay, so the people of in-between age have the most options for play or options for I mean, is that what we're measuring this by?
I don't know. I think that's
Availability of partners?
answering this question.
Well, I'm asking. You don't have to talk if you don't have an opinion on it.
If I may, I actually have an answer for this.
You have the answer?
Oh, yeah, I have the answer.
Okay.
Are you ready for this, Emma? The answer lies in the concepts behind feminism. A feminist could be a slave, can be whatever. What it boils down to is options. And I think what we're saying is that there is a certain age group where you simply have more options. So you have it easier. Whether it's the events you want to attend, you're not limited by age, right? Whether it's play opportunities, whether it's relationships, you simply have an age group where you have more options.
Okay. Where you are old enough not to be dismissed by the older crowd.
And young enough that you're not kind of one of them in the older crowd, yeah.
Okay. So the privilege is somewhere around 30, we think.
So is that not the answer?
I mean, the answer is always going to be 42 and to keep your towel with
Well, I'll
you.
be 42 next year, well, later this year, so I'll be right in the sweet spot then at 42. Is there an age you think is 30 it, or is 35 it, or?
I'd go more towards early and mid-30s just because some people will perceive, oh, they're getting close to the 40s. Uh-oh, they're old. They're over the hill. Let's not.
Okay. But early 30s is still far enough away from that.
Yeah.
Hey, but that was a rallying cry of the 60s. Don't trust anyone over 30.
Yeah.
But as Shane said earlier, like, that's when he popped in. He was still young enough to be, like, right there with the
Right at the sweet spot.
But still old enough. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, we lost Frank. We've gone 15 minutes over, which is no big deal because I think it was a good part of the conversation. But I think we're going to end this broadcast. Do you guys? Let's talk about the format just for a minute. Good, bad, not a problem. What should we do with this? I mean, I had some ideas coming into this that I would like to be able to open this up. This doesn't necessarily have to be a Louisville thing, even though that's kind of how we're starting it. We have enough participation from people to have some good conversations.
Well, why the fuck are we listening to St. Louis people?
Yeah, I know. They don't count. and a young
Ageism.
girl on top of it from St. Louis. That was a pout, but now that's something else. What did you say, Emma? I didn't hear you.
I think I'm not from Ferguson.
Oh, shit, right.
Hey, we also had Wyoming represented.
Yes, we did. Shai came to visit
And
us.
we have Antarctica.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Asha, from dialing in from Antarctica.